Hi, everyone. This is Ali John Chaudhry, psychotherapist, and today I'm here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author. And today we have a very special episode because we're going to be talking about verbal abuse and sibling estrangement. Now, not all sibling conflict is abuse, but a lot of abuse gets dismissed as conflict. And verbal abuse, if left unchecked, can have lasting effect on one's self-esteem and self-identity. So maybe you've experienced these subtle and not so subtle moments of verbal abuse within your family or from your sibling. In today's episode, we'll be discussing what verbal abuse can look like in a sibling estrangement context. So, Fern, it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's great to be here as always. We always want clarity. And when there's physical abuse, it's pretty clear what's going on. But when you have emotional abuse, there's a lot of rationalizing and a lot of dismissing and overlooking, especially when it comes to siblings, because we try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But that can really lead to a lot of issues, particularly what you said related to self-esteem and your sense of identity.
Hmm. Absolutely. And a lot of times it's that we're not even aware sometimes that we may fall into this category. And I think that's the thing that's important to look at. And of all the different types of abuse, including physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect, I think verbal abuse fits in the emotional abuse category, right? And verbal abuse often involves hostility, psychological control, intimidation, vulgarity, and humiliation. A lot of us that have experienced this know this, especially, right?
Right. Insults, threats, manipulation, all of these things can be emotional abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can include shouting as well, but not necessarily, right? Because as adults, we can make use of verbal abuse without elevating our voices, and it can be quiet and abusive, especially. And most people think verbal abuse is yelling, and oftentimes the most damaging forms are often the ones where we don't raise our voices, right? And I think that there are subtle and overlooked forms that we'll be getting into.
Yeah, it can be belittling or controlling or just hurting somebody else.
Exactly, right? And one of them is called sarcasm, right? I think that's one of them that really cuts deep and such because it affects our tendency and our sense of self-worth, right? And it's often disguised as humor, but it consistently targets identity or competence, right?
Mhm.
Especially when you have comments that are made like, "Wow, look at you actually sticking with something for once," right? You have these types of statements, right? That are hurtful when you think about it,
Right. And then the one that kills me that always follows is, oh, I was just joking. Can't you take a joke?
right? Exactly. That's a common one, especially when it goes too far. People try to pull it back that way by saying, "Oh, they're just joking," right?
Right.
And don't worry, he's the sensitive one. Handle with care, right? Things of that nature, right? When you're the one with the most emotional intelligence, and yet you're labeled as being the sensitive one and such. I mean, we all know you've never been the responsible one, right? So you have these snipes towards other people and such, right? That we can sometimes be on the receiving end of.
Yeah, I think if you think about emotional abuse, you recognize that it's persistent, it's often targeted, and it has lasting emotional scars.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think that's what makes it abusive, right? It lands as humiliation, not play. It's not playful at all. And if challenged, oftentimes it's as you said, right? It's like relax, I'm joking, right? It's never any accountability. It's about trying to lighten things up without being responsible for what one says and such. So I think that's important. And that's number one, right? Sarcasm and such. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say, though, it's tricky with siblings because there have been patterns of relating for sometimes decades, and they can be hurtful and harmful. But because we're so accustomed to the pattern, we don't recognize it.
Yeah. Exactly. So important, right? Normalization makes it somehow look as though this is okay, but in reality, it's not.
Mhm.
So, number two is chronic criticism disguised as honesty, right? And this really positions cruelty as truth telling or superiority, right? I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. You always do this. You never follow through. I'm trying to help you, but you don't listen. And if I don't tell you, who will? Hmm.
Oh, those always and never comments. All the red flags should be flying.
Right? Exactly. And they somehow claim the moral high ground, so your hurt becomes proof that you can't handle the truth when you think about it. And that's the hard thing, I think, with this one especially. And I think mass cruelty is an important one to recognize, as we said. And number three is gaslighting, right? That never happened, right? Oftentimes we've spoken about gaslighting, you and I, and how destabilizing it can be to you, our sense of reality or memory and such. That never happened. You're rewriting history again. You're way too sensitive. That's not what I meant. You
Mhm.
always twist things to make yourself the victim, right? And I never said that. You must have misunderstood.
Yeah, you're starting to sound like Darvo.
Right? Exactly. That's the thing too. It is Darvo when you think about it, isn't it? And oftentimes it's this turning the tables, especially that people have that creates this sense of awkwardness, I think, especially. And it's so important that we recognize the risks involved with this type of verbal abuse, because really what starts to happen with gaslighting is you stop trusting your own perception. There's a sense of internal confusion that starts to replace clarity and such.
Which is why I think you have to start paying attention to your body in these situations, because the body's going to tell you the real truth.
Exactly, exactly. When you feel that crunch, that cringe moment inside of yourself, right? You got to listen to that. I think that's really, really important for people to pay attention when that happens, because that's when we know something may be wrong.
And to be careful too who you give credence to.
Exactly.
What is their agenda and what is their perspective on this and what do they want to accomplish?
Exactly, right? Who can you trust, right? Being very careful about who it is that you can trust so
Mhm.
that you understand ultimately what is their motive and such. So number four is guilt tripping or moral pressure. So people use obligations, family roles, or sacrifice against you. And the type of examples that often come up, I think, in our sibling estrangement community is, after everything I've done for you, this is how you act, right? So somebody that's scorekeeping and such, right?
Mhm.
Family is supposed to stick together, but I guess that doesn't matter to you.
A lot of this fits into manipulation.
Yep. Yeah, when you hear it and such, you can see that there's an attempt at control. There's an attempt at getting some sort of response, right? Mom would be really disappointed in how you've been behaving and such. I guess I just care more about this family than you do. So you can see, right, the slight that's made with that and such, right? The how it is that there's a sense of coercion here that's being done in some ways to influence the outcome. And I think that's really, really important, because what happens is that this tends to turn boundaries into betrayal, right? When you're actually saying no, when you're actually putting limitations and such that are important for you, and choosing to assert yourself, then the other person can respond as though they're betrayed by this. And
The
yeah,
word you used, coercion, is key.
yeah, yeah. I think that's important for our viewers to recognize when this happens. When you feel that sense of control or that you're being led in a particular direction, important to listen to that inside of yourself, especially if you feel that pressure.
Yeah, the coercion is an expression of control.
Yeah, yeah. Number five is silent treatment and exclusion, right? So control through absence rather than words, but often with cutting framing. For example, I just don't see the point in talking to you anymore. Let me know when you're ready to act like an adult. So you have people making these types of comments. Others will ignore messages, and then later you're the one who distanced yourself. Again, turning the tables here with the silent treatment. We didn't invite you because we didn't want drama, which is another one I think that can be hurtful for some people.
I'm starting to get triggered.
Right?
You know?
It does bring up some examples. especially about this and such. And I think that, yes, it can stir us up because we recognize this. We recognize at which point what this does is that it creates exclusion. And then there's a sense of blaming you for the distance rather than they taking ownership or accountability about their actions or lack thereof, especially with silent treatment. So,
Yeah, and there's also the passive aggressive comments, which I don't know that we're going to get into that, but that over time, all of these things erode trust and self-worth.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And number six is the tone and contempt, not just words. It's
Yeah.
not just the particular words that are said, but it's how it's said. And we often see this. You really don't get it, do you? This is exactly why people have a hard time with you. And I can't have a serious conversation with you. And you're exhausting. So these are all things that we've heard before, especially at a certain time in our sibling relationship. And it's difficult to have this type of experience because it's the emotional weight that's behind the words that affects us.
Yeah, I often think about how one might say something like that in a tone that's palatable to somebody else.
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways to do it, but when there's verbal abuse, they're not looking for that more palatable way.
Exactly, exactly. That's so important for our viewers to understand that. And I think that that's the thing that hits deep. It's the contempt signals. It's the idea that you're somehow beneath respect. That respect doesn't apply to you, right? And I think that is a hard one to experience, especially. And I think that with contempt and cruelty or demeaning aspects, this really erodes identity over time and such, especially if you're exposed to this day in and day out. That can really be hard on somebody's morale and such. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was just thinking, I read this book called Cruelty by Nature, and it's by Peter Salerno. And he identifies a lot of what we're talking about and about certain personalities that use cruelty to get their way.
yeah,
And if you want a complete list, it's in that book.
yeah. That's actually a good resource to explore, especially if you want to know more about cruelty and its applications. So number seven is subtle comparison and undermining. So not always listed, but extremely common in siblings. This idea of comparison, and it's true that sometimes we don't speak of this as much, or a lot of people don't bring this up, especially on an adult-based level. But it is something that happens. Why can't you be more like the other sibling? They've always been the stable one, right? I just trust them more with this kind of thing. So there's this idea that we're often compared and such to our siblings. And again, I think this is one of the characteristics that if we're not careful, it asserts a certain type of hierarchy in terms of identity within the family structure. And you're cast in a role that you really can't escape.
Yeah, and I know in the next episode, we're going to get into why this occurs. And favoritism, obviously, is a big risk factor for
Yeah.
estrangement, and often is the foundation for verbal abuse.
Yeah, exactly. Very important. And yes, we'll explore some of these later on in some episodes, subsequent episodes coming up. So, number eight is concern that's actually control. And this is weaponized care. I'm worried about you. You don't seem stable lately. You might want to talk to someone about this reaction. And this doesn't seem like a healthy choice for you. And this is important because you can see how there's certain reframings in this particular these examples where it shows that somehow somebody is unwell, irrational, or incapable. I've known of some people, for instance, that have had a wellness check done on them, but it was done not so much as a check in to help them and such, but more along the lines of weaponizing it against them, to having to justify themselves to the authorities. And I thought that was awful that when that person had mentioned this to me because it really was used as a form of control.
Well, what I'm hearing in all of these examples is the idea that the person who is being emotionally abusive is establishing themselves in a more knowing or powerful position. and minimizing the target.
Yeah,
And as a result, if you don't have confidence and high enough self-esteem, you buy in.
exactly. Exactly. That's very important to be mindful of that, especially like we were saying in the beginning, how this affects us on those levels. So,
Mhm.
friend, we're almost out of time. I know that we want to keep some more of this important talk for next session, so that way we can dive deeper into what the psychology says and, of course, what we can do about it. So,
Mhm.
let's talk about resources right now. What would be your number one resource at this time?
Well, I continue to do one-on-one coaching, and particularly for people who are enduring difficult relationships with siblings, and hopefully helping them navigate some of those experiences. I've actually worked lately, Ali John, with more pairs and trying to help mediate siblings who have difficult situations.
Oh, that's great work, of course. And very important that we put ourselves out there that way and be that resource. And one of the resources I create, of course, is the Sibling Estrangement Support Group on Zoom. This is very important for people to have a space where they can feel a sense of like-mindedness and being heard and such by people that get this, and to be able to experience that sense of emotional vulnerability with people that are respectful and that have been through the same thing is very powerful. So I'm offering this as a resource for people. People can get in touch with me. Of course, I do my individual counseling sessions with people if they want to get in touch and want to free themselves of certain patterns they're going through. For instance, I'm working also on a workshop on people pleasing and such get beyond people pleasing. So, of course, people can get in touch with me if they'd like to be able to join in on this. This will be offered sometime in the fall. So it's a good time to get in right now to make sure that you lock in your position and your space because I'd like to keep these groups small so that it can be more immersive and such.
Mhm.
So yeah, well, Fern, this has been wonderful. So I really appreciate us getting together like this. So I really look forward to having our next video on this same subject and more.
Yes, and I just want to say that your tie-in about people pleasing fits perfectly with those who have been emotionally abused. So, those of you listening to this and feel that you have been emotionally abused, probably you've had some tendency towards people pleasing.
Yes, that's
Very
very
good.
important. So definitely a resource to look into. So thank you so much, Fern, for doing this, and I look forward to our next videos again.
I do too.
Take care.
I
Bye bye.